The Shape of Light. Chapter 1. The Flicker Before the Storm. The campfire burned low, its coals whispering like old secrets. Beyond the ring of tents, Baldur's Gate slept uneasily under a sky thick with the smell of thunder and metal. Tomorrow they would march on the Netherbrain. Tonight was for silence and ghosts. Gale sat apart from the others, quill scratching across a page that glowed faintly with weave light. Every few lines he paused, as if waiting for someone to answer. Dearest Mystra, I have measured the distance between redemption and annihilation, and it is the width of your silence. He stopped there. The ink trembled on the edge of the nib, unspilled. Writing love letters to lost causes again? Vesta's voice drifted from the shadows, warm, teasing, dangerously human. She stepped into the firelight with the ease of someone who never asked permission from the dark. Her hair caught the embers, her eyes caught everything else. Gale shut the book a little too quickly. It's a report. Scholarly reflection. She arched a brow. Scholarly reflections don't usually start with dearest. He tried to smile, failed. Old habits. Vesta crossed her arms. You're planning to detonate it, aren't you? The question hit like a spell with no verbal component. He looked away toward the distant city walls where lightning flickered like divine breath. If that is what redemption demands. She crouched beside him, close enough that the air shifted. And what about what you demand? Or is that a language you've forgotten to speak? Her nearness was unbearable. The scent of smoke clung to her hair. Her voice had the edge of laughter and grief. Gale could feel the orb beneath his ribs pulsing faster, as if it too leaned toward her. I once believed sacrifice was the highest proof of love, he murmured. Maybe once, she said, but now you're just proving you're afraid to live. He looked up. Her eyes were steady, reflecting firelight and something far more dangerous. Hope. When he reached for her hand, the weave answered first. Gold threads blooming between their fingers, tiny constellations of light that hummed in the air. Her breath caught. His did too. Careful, he whispered. This is volatile. So am I, she said, and didn't let go. The connection deepened, magic thrumming like a heartbeat shared between them. The glow climbed his wrist, her pulse beneath his thumb. For a moment he forgot every equation, every lecture, every whispered command of Mystra. All that existed was the unbearable closeness of her skin and the knowledge that if he moved a fraction closer, the world might ignite. Vesta smiled, small and defiant. If you're going to explode, wizard, do it for something worth dying for. He almost did. Instead, he leaned in just far enough for his lips to brush the corner of hers, a scholar's hesitation masquerading as restraint. The weave flared, soft and golden, then settled into the slow rhythm of their breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. Tomorrow may end everything. Then tonight, she said, we begin something. The fire popped. The stars held their breath. And for the first time since Mystra's fall from his sky, Gale Dekarios felt warmth that belonged entirely to the mortal world. Chapter 2. The Unravelling of Certainty. The dawn broke thin and grey, a hesitant light that made the camp look older than it was. Vesta woke to the low crackle of embers and the faint shimmer of weave energy dissipating like dream smoke. Gale was already awake, seated by the ashes, hands wrapped around a tin cup that had long since gone cold. He looked exhausted and magnificent in equal measure, hair in disarray, eyes still luminous from the residue of magic. The sight made something catch in her throat. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. He smiled without humour. "Sleep implies peace. The orb doesn't understand such mortal luxuries." Vesta knelt beside him, close enough for the edge of his cloak to brush her knee. "Maybe it's not the orb keeping you awake." His gaze flicked to hers, sharp and searching. "You think it's you?" "I think you want something you're not supposed to want," she said softly. And it scares you. A beat of silence. Then Gale exhaled, slow and deliberate, as if letting go of centuries of restraint. You are remarkably impertinent for someone who saved my life only yesterday. Maybe I like saving you, she said. Gives me an excuse to stay close. Lightning rolled across the far horizon. The camp stirred, soldiers preparing for war. Yet, in that fragile space between moments, the world belonged only to them. Gale reached out, fingers trembling slightly, and traced the outline of her jaw. You shouldn't look at me like that, it makes the weave respond. Then let it, she whispered. The magic obeyed. Light gathered at his fingertips, silver gold, wrapping them both in the faint shimmer of a half-formed spell. The air hummed with the promise of power, and something infinitely more human. When he touched her cheek, the energy sank into her skin like warmth from the sun. I have spent years studying control, he said, voice low. Every word of power, every theorem of restraint. And what have you learned? That I lose it entirely when you're near. He kissed her then, careful at first, as if testing the limits of reality. The taste of smoke and dawn and fear melted into something sweeter, something that demanded belief. Her hands found the back of his neck, drawing him closer until theory gave way to instinct. The weave flared brighter, swirling around them like golden wind. It should have burned. Instead, it felt like forgiveness. When they broke apart, breathless, Vesta rested her forehead against his. You're still thinking about dying, aren't you? He hesitated. Old habits die slower than men. Then promise me you'll try to live long enough to regret kissing me. He laughed, quiet, almost disbelieving. I suspect regret will not be the prevailing emotion. They kissed again, deeper this time, the world narrowing to warmth and heartbeat, and the shimmering pulse of magic. The light dimmed, the camp noises faded, and for a heartbeat the weave itself seemed to sigh in contentment. Outside, the thunder rolled closer. Inside the tent, the glow softened, their silhouettes dissolving into one another until the magic itself drew the curtain of shadow. Chapter 3. The Crown and the Candle. The city burned like a second sunrise. From the high ramparts, smoke spiraled upward in columns, and the thunder of siege engines rolled through the streets. Vesta moved through the chaos with a steadiness that looked like grace but was, in truth, sheer will. Every time she glanced over her shoulder, Gale was there, robes singed, eyes bright, hands alive with weave light. They fought like a single thought split into two bodies. Each time she struck, his magic flared in counterpoint. When his concentration faltered, she was there, steel against claw, laughter against despair. The bond they'd forged in the dark of the previous night felt now like armor, invisible, unbreakable. A blast from above shattered the paving stones near them. The shockwave hurled Vesta backward. Gale was beside her in an instant, one arm braced around her shoulders, the other raised, warding off falling debris with a shimmering dome of force. The barrier crackled, gold and violet, the signature of their combined power. Still alive? He shouted over the roar. She grinned through the dust. For now. You? Only just. You have that effect on me. The shield collapsed as the dust settled. She pushed herself to her feet, swaying. He caught her again, hands at her waist. For a heartbeat, the battle disappeared. The world narrowed to the heat between them, the hum of weave and blood mingling in their veins. Then the orb flared. Pain rippled through Gale's chest. The magic he'd been holding back surged outward, uncontrolled. She felt it through his grip, a violent, luminous heartbeat. Gale! She pressed her palms to his chest, channeling her own power into him, trying to balance the wild rhythm. Their energies collided, tangled, steadied. The glow dimmed to a dull shimmer, leaving them both breathless. He looked down at her, the edge of terror in his voice. I could end everything with one mistake. You won't, she said, because you're holding on to something real now. His hand came up, brushing the soot from her cheek. You mean someone. Maybe both, she murmured. For a moment longer they stood there in the echo of battle, two small lights against an impossible storm. Then Vesta turned back toward the sound of fighting. Come on, Professor. The world still needs saving. He smiled despite the pain. After you. The sky above Baldur's Gate split open. From the wound in the clouds, the Netherbrain descended, a vast, pulsing mass of thought and hunger. Lightning laced through the fog. The Crown of Karsus gleamed on its upper ridges like a parasite of gold and bone. Every mind in range quivered. Voices not their own whispered, "Join me. Serve. Ascend." Gale's knees buckled as the psychic wave hit. The orb in his chest flared in answer, a burning sun trying to escape his ribcage. Vesta's hand snapped to his shoulder. "Stay with me." He tried to speak, but another voice came out. Cool, endless, divine. Power unclaimed, perfection denied. Take it, my chosen. The crown called to him as the goddess once had. For a moment he saw it, himself crowned in crimson light, remaking the world in equations of flame. All it would cost was the tiny, fragile life clinging to his sleeve. Vesta stepped in front of him, sword drawn, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare answer it!" The Netherbrain screamed, thousands of minds in unison. The crown's light shot toward them in a beam of molten magic. Vesta threw up her hand, channeling raw weave energy, but the force was too much. Gale moved without thought. The wards burst from him in concentric rings of violet fire, wrapping her, shielding her, even as the orb within him howled. For an instant the three powers, the orb, the crown, and the mortal heart, balanced. Then Gale seized the connection, forced it downward, and spoke a single word of unmaking. The beam split. The crown cracked. The Netherbrain's shriek collapsed into silence. He fell to his knees. Smoke poured from his sleeves, blood traced a line from his mouth. Vesta was beside him before the echoes faded, catching him as he sagged forward. "It's over," she whispered. He looked up at her, eyes wild and shining. "No, it's only contained." Above them the great mass of the brain shuddered and disintegrated, raining faint motes of ash. The crown tumbled from the sky, landing amid the rubble of the plaza, a dull, broken thing but still pulsing faintly with power. Vesta followed his gaze. "Don't," she said. He swallowed, the pull of it tangible in the air. "You don't understand. It's knowledge incarnate." "It's a leash," she answered. "And you've worn enough of those." Her voice, steady against the storm, anchored him. He reached out, then drew his hand back, closing it into a fist. The glow from his chest subsided. For the first time, he resisted. Vesta exhaled shakily. "There's my wizard." He gave a breathless, incredulous laugh. "Your wizard," he repeated, and in that battered square with the ruins still smoking, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was desperate and human and entirely alive. Around them, the weave flickered once more, then steadied into a soft golden light. When the dust settled, the crown still lay there, dim and tempting, but Gale did not pick it up. He turned instead to Vesta, reaching for her hand. "Let's go home." The streets of Baldur's Gate were eerily still when the fighting stopped. Smoke drifted like ghosts through the arches. Broken spells fizzed against the cobblestones. The Crown of Karsus lay amid the rubble, its facets pulsing with the faint rhythm of a living thing. Vesta followed Gale's gaze. "If you leave it here, someone worse will pick it up." He nodded, pale and trembling. "I know. The weave is whispering already, promises, bargains. If I take it, I could contain it. Perhaps even... Or it could finish what the orb started." She stepped closer, took his hand. "Gale, don't own it. Return it." Her words struck the center of him. Return it. Not seize, not destroy. Give it back. He drew a shaking breath and lifted his free hand. The air around them rippled. The broken threads of the weave began to knit themselves into a spiral of light. The crown rose slowly from the ground, shedding ash as it ascended. "I call upon the Lady of Mysteries," he said, voice steady now. "Not as her chosen. As her student who has finally learned the lesson." The light coalesced. A figure formed within it, radiant, serene, vast as the night sky. Mystra regarded him with an expression that was neither wrath nor mercy, only comprehension. Gale stood unflinching, the broken crown levitating between his palms like a dying star. "I have carried your fire too long," he said. "Let me finally set it down." Mystra's voice flowed through the air, equal parts storm and lullaby. "Then I will grant you the peace we spoke of, my brilliant, stubborn child." She lifted her hand, and starlight poured through him. The pain was immense, but beneath it was release, the endless hum of the orb breaking into silence. When the last fragment of light left his chest, Gale fell forward, empty and whole. Mystra's radiance dimmed. "Live wisely, Gale Dekarios." And with that she vanished, leaving only the soft glitter of fading stars. Vesta caught him before he hit the stones. He was shaking, breathing in short bursts. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering his name until he opened his eyes. "It's quiet," he murmured. For the first time in years, it's quiet. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Then maybe you can finally rest." He managed a weary smile. "Not yet." "I'd like to remember how living feels first." The words hung there, trembling between them, until she kissed him. Fierce, grateful, unrestrained. The weave, freed from all divine command, shimmered around them like dawn breaking through mist. His arms came up around her, and the world seemed to contract to warmth and heartbeat, and breath shared in wonder. They stumbled together through the drifting light, laughter tangled with the ache of everything they had survived. His hands found hers. Her pulse answered his. The gold of the weave spilled across the stones like candlelight, softening every shadow. Outside, the first birds began to sing over the ruined city. Inside the circle of that gentle glow, two mortals learned the oldest magic of all: how to stay. Chapter 4. The Weave Between Us. Sunlight spilled through the tower window, unfiltered by wards or divine command. For the first time in years, Gale woke to the sound of his own heartbeat instead of the hum of unstable magic. For a moment, he simply lay there, disoriented by the silence. No whisper of Mystra, no throb of the orb. Only the steady breathing of the woman asleep beside him. Vesta stirred as the light reached her face. Her hair was a storm of fire and smoke against the pillow, her hand still resting across his chest as if to reassure herself he hadn't vanished with the night. He smiled at the sight. "You're still here." She blinked, sleep soft. "You make that sound like a question." "It feels like one," he admitted. "I half expected to wake in the astral plane and discover it was all a particularly elaborate hallucination." She propped herself up on an elbow, studying him. "Want me to prove you're awake?" He laughed, the sound rough but genuine. "Very much." She leaned down and kissed him, slow, certain, nothing tentative about it. The warmth of her skin against his chased away the last traces of divine cold. When they broke apart, their foreheads rested together, breaths mingling in the thin space between words. "This," he whispered, "is what living feels like." Vesta traced the line of his jaw with her thumb. "Messy? Uncertain? Worth it?" "All of the above," he said, "and terrifyingly beautiful." They stayed like that, tangled in sheets and sunlight, until the bells of Waterdeep began to chime somewhere far below. Tara's voice echoed faintly from the doorway, an indignant trill about indecent displays of affection before breakfast. But neither of them moved. Gale reached for Vesta's hand. I think I could get used to mornings that don't end in apocalypse. She smiled. Good. Because I'm not saving the world again before coffee. He laughed, pulling her close once more. The laughter turned into something quieter, deeper, contentment threaded through wonder. The weave shimmered faintly around them, not as power, but as an echo of their joined heartbeat. For the first time since the fall of Mystra's favour, Gale Dekarios felt entirely, gloriously mortal. And in that small room filled with light and warmth and the scent of ordinary life, he found that immortality had never felt so distant or so unnecessary. Chapter 5. Waterdeep. Waterdeep did not sing like Baldur's Gate. It hummed. The city's music was softer, carts on cobblestones, gulls over the harbour, temple bells tangled with shouted prices in the market. Somewhere inside that sprawling, pulsing body of stone and sea breeze, two people were quietly doing the most dangerous thing either of them had ever attempted. They were building a life. The Blackstaff's tower rose like a column of frozen night, carved sharp against the morning sky. Gale had always loved it from a distance, symbol, myth, stronghold of knowledge, but walking through its doors again as something other than a disgraced almost weapon felt like stepping into a world he'd once dreamed and then discarded. The great doors swung open at his touch, wards tasting him, recognizing the rhythm of his magic and the absence of the orb. For a heartbeat he feared rejection. The tower sighed instead, like a house relieved to find a lost child at the door. See, Vesta murmured at his side, it remembers you. Buildings have taste. Some do, Tara added from his shoulder. This one has impeccable standards. Present company? Tolerable. Vesta reached up to scratch the tressym under the chin. Careful, Tara. You adore me. I respect your opposable thumbs, Tara sniffed. Adoration is a stretch. Gale's lips twitched. Shall we go in? They did. The lecture hall was smaller than he remembered. Or perhaps he was larger now, not in height, but in gravity. Rows of young mages in training attempted to look unimpressed as Gale Dekarios, yes, that Gale, stepped up to the lectern in his deep violet robes, ink already staining his cuffs. Good morning, he began, then paused because it struck him all at once. Good morning, and no ticking bomb in his chest, no goddess weighing every word. Just students, just possibility. My name is Gale Dekarios, he said, and this course is called Applied Weave Theory, which is a foolish title because all weave is applied. If it isn't touching your life, you're not really working with it, you're just flirting. A ripple of laughter. Vesta, perched in the back row like a very pretty problem, grinned. Gale's gaze lingered on her half a heartbeat too long. Consider this, he went on, sliding into the rhythm that had always felt like spellcasting. Magic, at its heart, is relationship. Between you and the world. Between intention and consequence. Between what you could do and what you should do. His eyes flicked to her again, softer now. I once believed power was measured in how brightly one could burn, he said. These days I find myself deeply interested in what survives the fire. When the class ended, a knot of students swarmed him with questions. Vesta watched him light up as he explained a knotty thread of the weave, hands painting sigils in the air. The sparks that flew from his fingers were a pale echo of the way his eyes shone. When they were finally alone in the corridor, she bumped his shoulder with hers. You know, she said, that was almost unbearably attractive. He scoffed. My grasp of sub-theorems in planar resonance? Your grasp of redemption arcs, she said. And your hands, the way you move when you talk. It's infuriating. He flushed, delighted. You are biased. Obviously, she said, I have excellent taste. He reached for her, fingers brushing hers in the quiet hall, and the tower's wards purred like contented cats. Their rooms were high, airy, and absolutely not the Spartan scholar's cell Gale would once have chosen. Vesta saw to that. Within a week, Canvases leaned against every wall, studies of Waterdeep's sunrises, portraits half finished, an indulgent sketch of Gale asleep over open books. Jars of pigment and vials of enchanted ink cluttered the tables alongside spell components. Fabrics in rich colours softened cold stone. "This looks like a storm blew through a gallery," Gale said fondly, setting down a stack of books. "It's called living," Vesta replied, barefoot, hair up in a knot, streaked with ochre and gold. "You should try it." He crossed the room to her, slid his hands around her waist, and pulled her gently away from the canvas. "Consider me a devoted student," he murmured. "Careful," she warned, eyes bright. "I grade harshly." He bent his head to kiss the paint from her cheek. The touch began as a joke, then lingered, deepening. Her fingers curled in his sleeves, his breath faltered. The familiar hum brushed the edge of the air. Not the orb, not that wild edge of catastrophe. Something warmer. The weave answered their nearness with a faint shimmer, like sunlight on water. "How am I doing?" he asked, voice low. She tugged him closer until he stumbled against her, laughing softly. "Promising," she said. "May require extended study." His answering smile was pure, unguarded joy. Tara, observing from a shelf, rolled her eyes. "If you two intend to continue this alarming display of emotional competence, I am relocating to another room." "Close the door on your way out," Vesta called, without taking her eyes off Gale. They kissed again, and this time nothing interrupted them. The hours that followed unfolded with the unhurried certainty of a spell, long practiced but newly treasured. There was no desperation, no sense that the world would end if they stopped. Only the choice not to. Hands learning, relearning. Mouths smiling into kisses, laughter catching and dissolving into softer sounds. The city thrummed beyond their windows, uncaring and alive. When at last the candles burned low and the tower lay quiet, they lay tangled in sheets that smelled of paint and parchment and skin, the weave a faint, content glow at the edge of everything. Gale traced idle patterns along Vesta's arm, reverent. "I used to believe the measure of a life was how much of the weave you could hold," he said quietly. "But this abundance isn't power. It's love," she supplied. "A risky term," he said. "Difficult to quantify." "Then stop trying to," she whispered, and kissed him again. The rest of the night blurred, warmth and trust, and the easy slide into sleep with another heartbeat at his side. No divine voice waited in his dreams. When he woke just before dawn, Vesta's hand was resting in the center of his bare chest, over a scar that no longer glowed. "Still here?" she mumbled, not opening her eyes. "Yes," he said. "Completely." He pressed his lips to her hair, drew her closer, and the first light of morning eased across the tangled sheets as if blessing the simple, impossible fact of him alive, and hers. Chapter 6, The Proposal. For weeks, Gale Dekarios lived with a secret that refused to stay still. It glowed in his pocket, whispered in the margins of his lecture notes, and occasionally rearranged the runes in his tea leaves into patterns that spelled "tell her." He was, to his great embarrassment, utterly terrified. He began, of course, with research. If one was to propose to the woman who had saved one's soul, one did not simply ask. One curated a magical symphony of devotion, complete with visual aids. Vesta, oblivious or pretending to be, painted in the next room. Gale spent his evenings constructing an impossible spell. Fragments of constellations captured in glass, a circle of harmonic runes designed to play the melody of their shared weave resonance, and a single shard of crystal cut from the remnant of the shattered crown of Karsus. It took him 2 weeks and 3 near explosions. Tara caught him one evening, hair standing on end from a misfired sigil. "You know," the Tressim said dryly. "She already loves you." Possibly against better judgment, Gale exhaled smoke. Yes, but this must be transcendent. Just don't blow up the balcony. The night he chose was wind-still and clear. Waterdeep stretched below their tower like spilled jewels. Vesta found him pacing. "You're going to wear a hole in the stone," she said, smiling. "What are you plotting, wizard?" "An experiment," he said, voice too high, too quick. "A demonstration. Please, stand here. Precisely here." She laughed, indulgent. "You're adorable when you're panicking." He drew a circle of light around them, hands trembling slightly. One by one, motes of brilliance rose into the air, forming constellations above the balcony. Each star hummed with a memory. The campfire where she'd first teased him out of despair, the shimmer of their joined magic in the final battle, the faint gold glow of their first morning in Waterdeep. As the last light bloomed, Gale dropped to one knee, not graceful, but sincere. "I had planned a speech," he admitted. "It was, about 12 paragraphs long, heavily footnoted. But every time I rehearsed it, all I could think was that I would rather be living with you than talking about living with you." He opened his hand. The ring floated there, silver wire coiled around a sliver of violet crystal. Light from the floating stars caught in it, scattering across her face. "I once wanted to become a god," he said softly. "Now all I want is to grow old arguing with you about paint on the carpet and the proper way to store books. Vesta, will you marry me?" For a long heartbeat she said nothing. The wind tugged at her hair. The weave itself seemed to hold its breath. Then she knelt too, cupping his face in paint-stained hands. "You ridiculous, brilliant man! Of course I will." The weave flared in response, threads of light spilling from the circle, wrapping around them in a slow spiral. The stars he'd created burst outward, falling as petals of gold that dissolved before touching the ground. When she kissed him, it wasn't the desperate fire of battle, but something deeper, steadier, a promise written in pulse and breath. Magic folded around them, magnifying every sensation, the warmth of her fingers against his skin, the scent of rain and pigment, the faint electric hum of joy. The air shimmered, their laughter tangled with the sound of the weave's quiet music. When they finally drew apart, both were laughing and shaking, faces wet with tears and starlight. Tara's voice drifted from the doorway. "Well," she said, "at least you didn't blow up the balcony." Vesta laughed harder, leaning her forehead against Gale's. "You overthink everything, you know that?" He nodded, smiling so wide it hurt. "I know. But you said yes anyway." "I always would." He kissed her again, slower this time as the last motes of magic dimmed and the night folded around them like a blessing. Chapter 7. The Wedding. The night unfurled above Waterdeep like a velvet curtain pricked with stars. Lanterns floated between the towers of the Blackstaff Academy, their light reflecting off the harbour far below. The courtyard had been transformed. Halcyon's vines coiled up the stone columns, bursting into flowers that glowed faintly blue, while ribbons of soft gold magic drifted between them, humming in time with the city's heartbeat. It smelled of lilac, candle smoke, and new beginnings. Vesta stood at the edge of the crowd watching friends arrive one by one. Karlach and Will were first, emerging from a flicker of infernal flame, laughing, hands still clasped. The air around them smelled faintly of brimstone and freedom. Halcyon followed, calm and solid, his bare feet brushing vines that immediately began to bloom wherever he stepped. "A wedding," he said, voice like sunlight through leaves. "At last, something the forest understands." Jaheira entered next, wrapped in a cloak the colour of old forest bark, smiling like someone who had seen far too many endings to take beginnings for granted. "Well," she said, "you two certainly do make the impossible look routine." A sudden voice from above interrupted her. "Did someone say impossible?" "That's my cue." Astarion descended the stairs, coat of black velvet trimmed in scarlet, a gleam in his pale eyes that could have been hunger or mischief. Or both. He swept a bow so low it bordered on parody. "Darling," he said to Vesta, "you are radiant. If I weren't so dreadfully well-mannered, I'd steal you away before the vows are done." Gale, standing beside her, arched one brow. "You'd find that remarkably inefficient." Astarion smiled, slow and feline. "I'm very efficient when properly motivated." Vesta laughed and touched Gale's arm. "Let him play. He's happy for us in his own incendiary way." From behind them, Shadowheart and Lae'zel arrived together. Shadowheart in silver, Lae'zel in crimson armor that gleamed in the lantern light. They exchanged glances that were half challenge, half tenderness. Lae'zel muttered something about surface ceremonies, but she was smiling. Minsk came last. Boo perched proudly on his shoulder in a tiny bow tie. "Tonight we celebrate love," he boomed. "And cake." Boo approves of both. The crowd cheered. Even Withers, stepping out of the shadows to officiate, appeared amused. "Excellent," he said dryly. "Everyone appears sufficiently animated." Under the arch of light, Gale waited. He had dressed simply, dark robes trimmed in silver, his hair caught back by a narrow ribbon, but the glow in his eyes made him look almost celestial. When Vesta stepped into the circle, every ward and lantern brightened, as though recognizing her. Withers raised skeletal hands. "We gather to observe two mortals defy all sensible precedent and bind themselves together. Do speak now if you object, though I warn you, objections rarely end well." "Only that it's a tragedy for the rest of us," Astarion called lightly. Shadowheart elbowed him. "Shh." Vesta reached for Gale's hands. Light spilled between their fingers. "I spent years believing the weave was my only home," Gale said, his voice rough. "You showed me that it was only a language, and that love was the thing worth speaking in it." Vesta smiled, eyes bright. "You found the universe in equations. I found it in you." They slipped rings onto each other's fingers. The weave rippled outward, brushing the gathered friends with a wave of warmth that made even Lae'zel blink back a tear. "Withers," Jaheira whispered, "you're smiling." "I assure you I am not," he replied. "It's an unfortunate side effect of bone structure." "Then," he continued aloud, "by the authority of nobody in particular, you may kiss and risk destabilizing local reality." They did, and reality, wisely, held. Music burst through the courtyard. Karlach pounding a drum, Will strumming a lute, Shadowheart's clear voice threading through the melody. Halsin conjured gentle breezes to carry the sound through the night. Jaheira poured wine that refilled itself as long as laughter lasted. Astarion watched from the edge of the crowd, then stepped forward and cut in on the dance. "May I?" he asked, offering a hand to the bride. Vesta grinned and took it. "Only if you promise not to bite." "I've learned restraint," he said smoothly, spinning her with impossible grace. "Though I admit, you make it difficult." "You just like seeing Gale twitch," she said. "Entirely true." Astarion grinned back. They twirled once more, then Astarion bowed, kissed her hand with theatrical solemnity, and returned her to Gale. "Treat her well, Professor, or I may develop scruples." "Unlikely," Gale replied, smiling despite himself. The laughter spread through the crowd like firelight. Mince and Boo began a chant of "Dance, dance for love and glory." Karlach whooped and hauled Will into the middle, and within moments the entire company was dancing, stomping, and spinning beneath the lanterns. Even Withers tapped one bony toe in time. When the revelry finally quieted, the courtyard lay strewn with petals and empty glasses. The vines glowed faintly under the moonlight. Friends drifted away through portals or into the city streets, calling farewells that echoed with joy. Vesta and Gale climbed to the balcony overlooking Waterdeep. The harbour shimmered below, lanterns floating on the tide. Above them, the stars were bright enough to rival magic. Gale took her hands again, turning the ring gently on her finger. "How did we end up here?" he asked softly. She leaned against him. "You stopped trying to be a god," she said, "and I stopped running from miracles." He bent to kiss her, slow and reverent. The weave pulsed once around them, gold light mingling with the night air. Behind them, Tara's voice floated through the doorway. At last, some peace and quiet. Gale smiled into Vesta's hair. "Peace," he murmured. "At last." The city bells chimed midnight, and the light around them faded into the simple warmth of two hearts, steady in the dark. Chapter 8. The Threshold. The tower was quiet again. Somewhere below, Karlak's laughter still echoed faintly, the last sparks of the celebration fading into the harbour air. Lanterns bobbed in the windows, petals drifted across the floor. Gale lifted Vesta into his arms as if it were the simplest spell he had ever cast. She laughed, a sound lighter than any incantation. "Professor Dekarios," she teased, "you're aware that gravity applies indoors as well?" "I am a wizard," he murmured, nudging the door open with his shoulder. "We make exceptions." He carried her across the threshold. The wards recognized them both now, flaring briefly with golden light before dimming to a soft, private glow. The air hummed with weave energy, content, playful, alive. Books shifted on their shelves to make room for flowers that had appeared out of nowhere. When he set her down, she didn't move away. She stayed close enough that her breath brushed his throat. "You've planned everything, haven't you?" she whispered. "Almost everything," he said, smiling. "The rest I prefer to discover." They kissed, first softly, then with all the joy and exhaustion of people who had run every gauntlet the world could offer and somehow ended up here. Each touch woke a little burst of magic, a candle lighting itself, a gust of wind stirring the curtains, motes of gold drifting like slow fireworks. The weave responded not to command but to emotion, echoing the rhythm of their laughter. Vesta tugged him toward the bed, sheets already scattered with petals. They fell together, tangled in light and shadow, the room pulsing gently around them. His hands traced the curve of her shoulders, her fingers found the scar at his chest where the orb had once been and rested there, feeling the steady human heartbeat beneath. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. "The world," he said. "And you." She smiled. "Then you're living." The weave shimmered one last time, sealing the words in light. Outside, the moon drifted behind a cloud. Inside, their laughter and whispers blurred into the soft rustle of sheets and the steady music of two heartbeats finding the same tempo. When silence finally settled, it was a peaceful one. Warm, mortal, and perfect. Epilogue. The dance of days. The tower in Waterdeep had changed over the years. Vines crept higher along the stone, the study smelled of paper and rain. Shelves that once held grimoires now carried toy dragons and half-finished sketches in bright crayon. Somewhere on the top floor, Tara ruled from her perch, still disdainful of sticky fingers and loud questions. Evening settled like a soft cloak over the city. Candlelight spilled from the sitting room where Gale and Vesta's children had assembled in their favourite pile of blankets. The youngest, hair full of paint and curiosity, tugged at Vesta's sleeve. "Tell us a story, Mama." "One with dragons." "And boo." Vesta smiled and brushed a curl from the child's forehead. "Dragons again?" "Very well. Once upon a time there was a wizard who thought knowledge was the only kind of power that mattered." Gale looked up from his chair, mock offended. "You make him sound insufferable." "Oh, he was," she said. "Always quoting poetry at inconvenient times." The older children giggled. Did the wizard ever stop talking? "Eventually," Vesta said. "He met a very patient woman with a sword and a bad habit of interrupting divine destinies." Gale rose, crossed to her side, and crouched by the hearth. The firelight painted him in gold. "And she," he added, "taught him that the weave is only a mirror for what's in the heart." that love, courage, and the occasional well-aimed fireball make a much finer spell than any god could grant. The youngest clapped. And did they win? They did, Vesta said. Not because they were strongest, but because they stayed together. From the mantel, Boo squeaked triumphantly. Minsk and Jahaira had visited earlier that week. The hamster had been spoiled so much with treats he refused to leave. See? Gale said solemnly. Even the mightiest heroes agree. The children laughed until they were breathless. One by one, their eyelids drooped. The eldest leaned against Vesta's shoulder. Tell it again tomorrow? As you wish, she promised. When the last child had been carried upstairs and the house grew quiet, Gale and Vesta lingered by the window. The city below was a sea of lamplight. He wrapped his arms around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. They'll outgrow our stories soon, he said. Then we'll make new ones, she answered. He smiled, pressing a kiss into her hair. It still amazes me, he murmured, that the world keeps turning, that magic keeps humming, that I get to be here for all of it. Vesta turned in his arms. We earned this peace, she said. Now let's live it. Outside, the moon climbed higher, casting its light across the tower where laughter still lingered in the stones. The weave stirred once, soft, approving, then quieted again, content to leave the living to their dance of days. The end.
I once spoke the stars into order, mapped every spark in the sky.
But every theorem and border fell silent the moment you sighed.
You carried the weight of forever, chasing a god's endless flame.
I found you where time could not tether and whispered your mortal name.
Together now the weave hums low and the night stands still. Your hand in mine is the spell I feel. No crown, no orb, no god's command, just heart to heart, just hand in hand.
Whatever comes, whatever wish, I'll love you as you wish. I once feared the quiet of living,
The hush when the magic is gone.
but peace has its own kind of rhythm. Your breath, my dawn.
I painted the world in your colors,
Gold folded into the red. Our stories became one another's, our dreams the life we wed. Let the constellations fade.
let the gods forget our names.